Let our gathering be a time to listen to voices less often heard. May our time together bring illumination and understanding. Come, let us worship together. As Melinda lights the chalice, I invite you to join me in reciting the words for lighting our chalice. We handle this chalice to remind ourselves of the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of commitment.
Good morning, and welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Society of Burlington, Vermont. Today is Sunday, January 21st, 2024, and I am Melinda Lee, a member of our Worship Associate team, and the pronouns I use are she and her. It's a pleasure to see you all here on this freezing morning, and also wonderful to know that more people are joining us through the live streaming service. Hopefully you folks are warm at home. Welcome, everybody. Unitarian Universalists come from many traditions, backgrounds, and genders, and what we share is a concern to build a local and world community based on compassion, justice, respect, care for the environment, and a desire to find meaning in our lives. We are all growing, all learning, and all loved. Just as you are welcome here. We hope you experience connection, compassion, and a feeling of coming home. We welcome all who are welcoming. And we acknowledge that our meeting house and many of our homes and schools and places of work are built on the traditional lands of the Western Abenaki peoples. We remember the hardship and violence the Abenaki people have endured because of colonialism and white supremacy. We give thanks to share this place, protect it, and care for all who live here. Our guest speaker and designer of the worship service today is Kathy Bilava Stamper, a member of our UU, who is a writer, educator, and development professional, holding both U.S. and European Union citizenship. As a first-generation American, a singular thread in Kathy's career has been advocacy. She attributes this to her working-class roots, and she is grateful for the many who helped her find her way, both personally and professionally. Our senior minister, Reverend Karen G. Johnston, will return to the pulpit next week. If you have joined us for the first or second time, would you be willing maybe to stand or just to wave so we can give you a special welcome for being here? Okay, thank you. All right, welcome. We also have welcome ambassadors. Could Mary Harrington and Susan Ogden please stand? They're over in the back there and right over here in front. And they are specially delegated to connect with you and provide answers, but we'd all be glad to welcome you here on this cold morning. You can also fill out a card found in the back of the pew that will introduce you to our UU, and you can place it in the offering baskets. Thanks for joining, and those of you joining us from the live stream can connect with us through our website. If you would like to access today's order of service, there's a QR code on the inside cover of the gray hymnal. If you scan it with your cell phone, the order of service should appear. And unfortunately, with the current rise of COVID cases in our community and elsewhere, we're requesting that everyone mask or consider masking while in the meeting house. Masking is one of the ways we can care for each other, particularly the most vulnerable among us. Masks can be found outside the office, which can be reached by going out that door, down the stairs, and slightly to your right. Just a few announcements today. Coffee hour, where you can find tea, hot water, and other drinks and sometimes some snacks, is downstairs in the community room. And you may notice a lot of parents and children heading upstairs after the service instead of going downstairs with the rest of us for coffee and such things. A 9-session Our Whole Lives, or OWL, human sexuality class for kindergarten and first graders is beginning today with family orientation. So we're about to continue. Again, welcome everyone. It is good to worship together.
Good morning. I'm not James. He is home taking care of his family today and asked if I would lead us in a couple of hymns this morning. So we're going to start off with number 1051 in the teal hymnal called We Are. And if you would rise in body or spirit and sing with me. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. We are our grandmother's prayers, and we are our grandfather's dreamings. We are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We are mothers of courage and fathers of time. We are daughters of dust and the sons of great visions. We're sisters of mercy and brothers of love. We are lovers of life and the builders of nations. We're seekers of truth and keepers of faith. We are makers of peace and the wisdom of ages. We are our grandmother's prayers, and we are our grandfather's dreamings. We are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We are mothers of courage and fathers of time. We are daughters of dust and the sons of great visions. We're sisters of mercy and brothers of love. We are lovers of life and the builders of nations. We're seekers of truth and keepers of faith. We are makers of peace and the wisdom of ages. We are our grandmother's prayers, and we are our grandfather's dreamings. We are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are.
Good morning. I am Rowan Van Ness, and I am going to share with you a tale. But first, I need to invite all of our children, or children at heart, to come forward for the story. And while you're coming up, I'm going to tell you a little more about the story. This is a famous folk tale that comes to us from Ukraine. It's about a mitten. And folk tales are a kind of story that are usually passed along orally. That means people tell them to each other, and then every time they tell them, they try and remember how it was told to them, and sometimes they maybe are good at storytelling and add lots of additional details, and sometimes they're trying to tell a fast version and they're skipping out the details. So there's a lot of different versions of this very same story. So this is about a mitten. And I am going to need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 volunteers. Can I have a volunteer who's willing to be the mouse? All right. You can be the, well, I'll let you know when your time comes, okay? So we have a mouse and then a frog when the time for a frog comes, and a rabbit. We got a bunny. An owl. You can be our owl. A boar, which is like a wild pig. A fox. Let's see. A wolf. A bear. We need a bear. Vera, you're going to be the bear. And a sparrow. This is our last one. You'll be our sparrow. Thank you. Okay. So once upon a time, there was a young boy, and he had bright red mittens. This particular mitten was very curly, but it was a mitten nonetheless. And one day, his mother told him to go into the woods and to collect some firewood. So he put on his bright red mittens, and he walked around, and he went to collect the firewood. But sometimes, I know we talked about mittens and gloves the other day, sometimes mittens aren't as good as you want for picking things up. So he tucked the mittens in his pocket, and what do you know? One of them fell down on the ground. And it stayed there with no help at all. She's invisible. So, this little boy got his firewood. He had a little sled that he put the wood on, and he went home, and he was so pleased to have found enough wood that he didn't even notice when he dropped his mittens. But then there was a little mouse. Where's our mouse? And yes, come on up. And the little mouse found its way into the red mitten. So just find a spot on the mitten. You can sit or stand or whatever you want. And this mouse was so excited. It was going to be nice and warm in this mitten, and it was out of the cold. And this mouse thought it would be a great place to take a nap. But not long after that, she heard a ribbit, ribbit. Where's our frog? All right. So the frog comes along, and the frog seems very cold. But the mouse didn't mind the frog that much, so she lets him come on in and stay with her in the mitten. And the frog hops happily into the mitten and finds a nice place to curl up. And just as the mouse and the frog were getting ready to fall asleep, they hear a light boom, boom, and they were startled. They look outside, and what do they see but a bouncing rabbit? Where's our rabbit? All right. So the hoppity frog recognizes the rabbit and eagerly invites the rabbit to come on inside the mitten. The rabbit happily accepts and bounces in after the frog, and the mouse makes some room. And just as the mouse, the frog, and now the rabbit were settling into the cozy mitten for a good night's sleep, they hear a whoosh, vroom, vroom, the sound of flapping wings of what else other than the old owl. And groaning and grumbling, the animals begin to make room for the owl, as they neither want to be rude nor argue with the old owl. And with the flap of his great wings, the owl pushes his way into the mitten. And once again, they're just starting to get sleepy when they hear the stump, stump, stump of the approaching boorish, boar. And the boar demands to be let into the mitten, for it is a cold night, and he needs a place to sleep. And the animals see his long, curved tusks, and they don't want to argue, so they make room. And all the animals shuffle over, and the boar climbs in. All the animals, they're snuggling tight, and they hear the little pip-pat, pip-pat, pip-pat of footfalls. and they peek out of the mitten, and they see a sly fox looking as cold can be. And shivering, she politely asks if there's any room for her in the mitten. And all the animals sigh, and they squeeze together, and the fox slides into the mitten too. You gotta make some room for that fox in that mitten. At this point, there seems to be absolutely no room left. It feels like every critter was nestled together as tightly as they could be. But everyone was in, and believe it or not, they were starting to drift off. And then, what do you think they heard? Not quite yet. They hear a schluff, 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 and they listen to the sad plea of a mournful wolf. There was an awkward pause, as there wasn't any room left for the wolf. But in the silence, the wolf started howling, and everyone felt sorry for him. So they sucked in their guts, and they squeezed together once more. Maybe you need to stand up on the mitten or something. You gotta find some room for that wolf. And the wolf climbed into the non-existent space and promptly fell asleep. And before anybody settled in for too long, they hear the resounding kaboom, kaboom, kaboom. The thunderous footfalls echoed through the forest, and without waiting to be asked, all the animals in the mitten scrambled to make room. The only animal in the forest that this could be was the bear. Where's our bear? Oh, yep, okay, our bear. And it was a good thing those animals made room, because that bear clawed and forced his way into the mitten. And the mitten continued to stretch, and it looked like it was about to burst. But to the great relief of all the animals, it miraculously stayed intact. Finally, at long last, the animals truly settled down and began to fall asleep for the night. And the dawn breaks, and the small singing sparrow flies overhead and sees the bright red mitten full of woodland animals. And she politely asks if she can come into the mitten for a quick nap. But all the animals were sleeping, and she didn't want to wake them. She was so small, surely there was enough room for her. And she hops a little closer, and she puts one tiny foot into the mitten and accidentally tickles the big bear's nose. Achoo! The great bear sneezed, and all the animals flew out of the mitten, carefully and gently, and not falling down the stairs. Talk about a rude wake-up call. Soon after, our young boy came to see what the noise was. He looked all around, but he didn't see any animals, just several animal tracks going in every direction away from his mitten. But there it was, and he was relieved that he found it, and he picked it up and he put it on, and he wondered if that mitten had always been bigger than the other one. And that is our story. At this time, I'd like to invite the congregation to sing our children out to their faith development groups.
As you journey, may you know, love and hope go with you. Learn and grow. As you journey, may you know, love and hope go with you, love and hope go with you, learn and grow.
How lovely it is to be here in the meeting house on this frosty morning. I want to welcome all that are here and say hello to those that are far away, including my mom. Hi, Mom. So I've been a member of the First Unitarian Universalist Society since 2007. I appreciate this opportunity to speak with you about Voices from Ukraine, Vermont. I brought a few props to help me because, quite honestly, I've never delivered a sermon before and it's a little terrifying. So I brought a little elf from my friend Lilia, who is from Ukraine. She's currently living in Poland, and she is one of the voices you will hear this morning. I brought this keychain from Svetlana, who is also living in Krakow, Poland at this time. She's a Ukrainian woman who runs a wonderful soup shop that I met. And on my last day, when I bought my last cup of soup, and I said I was coming back to America, she said, oh, wait. I have to give you something. And she literally took the keys off of her keychain and gave me this keychain. This is a Christmas tree made by a wonderful little boy named Gleb from somewhere in eastern Ukraine. I don't remember his hometown, but I was teaching him English, and he was 8 years old, and he had this fascination with Titanic. He always wanted to talk with me about Titanic and little facts about the Titanic. And then the last prop is older. It's actually Ukrainian worry beads, which I purchased in Ukraine just after the Maidan revolution. And I mention these last because the reality is Russia's aggression against Ukraine didn't start in February of 2022. It's been going on for a long time and a lot of generations. So I so appreciate your listening ears this morning. While preparing to share the voices of Ukrainian refugees, I wondered, and I stressed, as Tony, my husband, can allude to, what am I going to write about? I wondered which of our faith's principles would best apply. I settled on our first UU principle, to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And our sixth principle, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. I will speak about my connection to Eastern Europe, including some of the trauma my parents experienced and stories of that war-based violence that they passed on to me. I will also tell you of my volunteering with Ukrainian refugees in Poland and a local volunteer-led effort to bring the art, the voices, films, and perspectives of Ukrainians to the wider Burlington community. My connection to Eastern Europe, a place of highly complicated geopolitics, runs deep. I am the daughter of Polish Roman Catholic immigrants, both of whom were deeply traumatized as children during World War II. My mom, born in a small farming village in 1939, was taught by her father to throw her little body on the ground face down when she heard or saw the barrels of German howitzers being raised. Mom's community was situated between German and Russian fronts, with deadly consequences for villagers that continued long after the Germans and the Russians left. The opposing armies seeded fertile Polish soil with deadly landmines, left to kill and maim unsuspecting children and adults long after Germany's surrender. There was a time in my mother's church in her little village after the war, people were sitting in the sanctuary as we are now, and they heard kaboom. Later, they realized it was 3 10-year-old boys who were friends from the village who had stumbled upon a landmine. These are examples of the stories I was raised with. My father, born in 1924 in Western Ukraine, as it was then part of Poland. Remember my reference to complicated geopolitics and shifting borders? He was taken from his family and deported to Germany as a forced laborer in October 1941 when he was 16. His German captors made him work 7 days a week in a sugar factory in a town called Haldensleben. I just learned about that town through a German archive that's been recently opened to members of the public. My father never spoke specifically of the places the Germans held him. Nazi racial ideology placed Slavic people slightly above Jews and Roma. Poles were officially deemed subhuman. Dad lived on barely subsistent rations and was severely beaten by his German overseers. Now I invite you to think for a moment of a lesson your parents taught you at 5 or 6 years old. Think for another moment of the contours of your life when you were 16 and how they helped form your character. I was raised on war stories, with anecdotes seeping out, particularly in times of stress. It was so normal in my family that when little Kathy Bielava Stamper, Kathy Bielava then, when I attended sleepovers and the other girls would tell ghost stories, I told war stories. This seemed fantastical to my little friends. Snug in our sleeping bags with lights out, I'd be asked, Kathy, can you tell another war story? And I would, because I was filled with them. This is why I spent 9 weeks in 2022 and 5 weeks at the end of 2023 in Krakow, Poland, working on a World War II writing project while also volunteering with Ukrainian refugees. I think it's important that I share some content. Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24, 2022. An estimated 18.1 million refugees from Ukraine have crossed into Poland since then. Approximately 1.5 million Ukrainians remain in Poland, which has absorbed the largest number of refugees. When I was there, Krakow hummed with Ukrainian voices and so many refugee mothers with their children. I'd see them on the medieval square and on the Plante, a circular park encircling the core of the old city. They held their children's hands as they spoke into iPhones. I imagined these women and children sheltering in basement bomb shelters and enduring dangerous bus and train rides to cross the border to the safety of Poland, an EU and NATO member country. I stress that. It's an EU and NATO member country, which makes all the difference in the universe. I envisioned tearful goodbyes as their fathers, brothers, husbands, and boyfriends remained behind to fight. Shortly after arriving in Krakow, I overheard 4 young adults at a nearby table speaking Ukrainian. I speak Polish and understood enough of their Ukrainian to know they were involved in supporting refugees. Within days, I was volunteering at Kingdom Krakow, a Ukrainian school and cultural center serving Ukrainian refugees displaced by the war. I was teaching English, conducting trauma-informed interviews, and advising on grant and development initiatives. The idea for Voices from Ukraine, Vermont was born. Before we bring to a close this first part of my message, I want to introduce 3 women, my friends, who will return in the second half of this message. They are Veronika, who is 27 and who worked as an arts administrator and is from Kharkiv. Veronika's voice is going to be read by Mia, our volunteer. Tonya, who is 41 and who worked as a teacher and is originally from Odessa, read by Melinda. And finally, Lilia, who is 57 and is also a teacher and is from Kyiv and will be read by Linda. Veronika, I invite you to the microphone.
Veronika. When Russian soldiers first started gathering at the border in March of 2021, we thought maybe nothing would happen. As the buildup continued, particularly in December and January, we were warned that something was going to happen. Many Ukrainians with resources began renting homes in Western Ukraine or left the country. I lived with my mother and grandmother in an apartment building. I wondered if there was something I should do.
Tonia, I was required to call all the parents of my students to tell them school was canceled. Who knew, and who knows how long this war will last? I started to cry. My colleagues and I were all crying. We were in shock and felt this immediate sadness. We feared mostly for our children. I have a 7-year-old daughter, Liza, and loved ones. We realized that a lot of families' sons would suddenly be mobilized to defend Ukraine from Russia's unprovoked assault. I trembled with fear. It was hard to believe this was actually happening. I telephoned my friend and learned that her husband was already activated. As Ukrainians, we became united in that moment, in our fear and in our grief. A deep emotional chasm formed, delineating my life before and after the start of war. Thanks to God, there were no bombings in our town that first day. There were rocket attacks on military installations several miles away. We could hear the explosions and feel the tremors, which increased our fear. We scrambled to find windowless areas to hide in our flats and homes. Interior rooms and corridors felt safe.
We'll hear more of these two women's voices as well as Lilia's later in our service.
Back from Ukraine to Vermont. Spiritual practices come in many forms within our Sunday service. Generosity, stories like we've heard, spoken meditation, stillness, music, and creativity like the mitten. In this portion of our service, each of us will have a chance to enter into those communal practices to which you feel drawn today. As a justice-seeking community, our generosity practice includes sharing half the offering each Sunday. And this month, the offerings will be shared with a fund established to support Hisham Aratani, one of the young Palestinian men shot on North Prospect Street in Burlington on November 25th, leaving him paralyzed from the chest down. His family started a GoFundMe account intended to help cover the costs associated with his recovery, including the long and uncertain rehabilitation needs and the cost of adaptive living needs. And as his family writes, quote, providing Hisham with what he needs to enable him to change the world for the better, as we know he will. So when the music plays soon, you are invited to come forward silently along the outer sides to mark a joy, a sorrow, or a gratitude by moving a stone from the basket onto the table. This will create a fleeting representation of our shared lives this morning. Also, if in coming forward you have a gift to add to the offering, you can place it in the baskets on either side. Donations can also be received by texting Steeple 73256. And for those attending online who would like to stay seated, we invite you to lean into the musical meditation and find an opportunity for stillness and centering. First, these words, followed by a shared stillness. Air shares that they have experienced a series of joy, including feeling more connected to multiple religious communities in Burlington. And Reverend Karen shares her sorrow that at this time of deep cold, Burlington city government chose to begin to dismantle the Battery Street encampment on Friday, even when people seeking shelter are being turned away because other places' beds are full. And I'd like to add one this morning, and that is one of my joys in the winter in Vermont is to have blue sky from horizon to horizon. May the joys and sorrows of each be the joys and sorrows of all, reminding us of our shared humanity. let us bring our spiritual practices this morning to a close by reciting together the message of dedication. With gratitude, we dedicate these gifts in the service of our mission to inspire spiritual growth, care for each other and our community, seek truth, and act for justice.
Before I launch into part 2, I wanted to acknowledge how wonderful it was to see the smiling faces of some of the children of our congregation participate in the enactment of the Ukrainian folktale, The Mitten. And I left out one of the props I brought. It's actually a portrait of me by one of the little girls. You recognize the eyeglasses, at least, by one of the little girls that I had the good fortune of teaching English to, and her name is Masha. And Masha was 8 years old and was evacuated to Poland with her mother. And every day to school, she wore these Mickey Mouse earrings and a Mickey Mouse pendant. And I remember, and she was always drawing, I have multiple portraits of myself thanks to Masha. And the thing that I remembered was I noted that she wore these sweet earrings and pendant to school every day. And I said, Masha, I love your Mickey Mouse earrings and your pendant. And she said, my daddy gave them to me before he went to the war. And I think about her this morning, continuing to hope that as her art is sustained, that her daddy is safe. This is part 2 of Voices from Ukraine. Lilia.
Lilia. I didn't tell my 83-year-old mother where we were going at first. I didn't want to upset her. We had 15 minutes to pack. I assembled documents, sandwiches, a few articles of clothing, including one unmatched sock. People and pets crammed the Kyiv train station. I felt like I was watching a film about World War II. Once we boarded, a man with a gun walked through the train, ordering Ukrainian men out. They needed to stay behind to fight.
Veronica. We ate our final meal in our apartment, potatoes, meat, and vegetables. I took a photo of that Last Supper. We sensed danger closing in. We left in haste, leaving unwashed dishes in the sink.
Tonia. I packed documents, a backpack of everyday necessities, including an umbrella, toys for my daughter Liza, and her sketchbook. Liza brought her favorite stuffed animal, a kitten she calls Koshenya, Ukrainian for kitten. She still sleeps with Koshenya.
Lilia. My cat, Musha, spent much of the journey looking out the window as we crossed Ukraine. Our train had wooden seats. Compartments were packed with people and a menagerie of children, babies, and pets. At one point, we were stuck in a field with no water and no toilets. 10 hours into our train ride, a baby began crying and would not stop, and the mother was doing everything she could to calm her child. People began covering their ears. The crying continued, adding stress to an already stressful situation. An African university student on board offered to hold the baby for the distraught mother. He cradled the baby, he smiled, he cooed, and the crying ceased. People applauded, smiles emerged on our faces. He held the child for 1.5 hours as he stood with his luggage.
Veronica. Adults, children, and animals were sitting on floors and between doors. The train traveled slowly. We stood for 13 hours. All the while, I feared an attack could happen. Our final trek to the Polish border involved 4 different cars, 3 driven by volunteers and 1 very expensive taxi.
We traveled over 700 miles by bus and waited for 12 hours at the Ukrainian-Polish border. I remember seeing all those evergreens through the window, lining the roadway. I live in southern Ukraine near the Black Sea in Odessa, where there aren't many fir trees. This was different, beautiful. My daughter Liza and I caught a second bus and disembarked at Krakow Central Bus Station after a 5-day journey. I was afraid to move. I didn't speak the language. Liza needed to go to the bathroom. I felt vulnerable, tired, and scared. I'd barely slept. I wondered at that moment if it would have been better for us not to have left Ukraine. But then I recognized I needed to be strong for my daughter. Liza had no one else to help her. I realized I could be brave. Volunteers opened their hearts to us, and we received a level of assistance I'd never truly felt before. I now realize all possibilities for Liza and me to maybe recover some sense of normalcy. I feel safe now. And I no longer worry that Liza and I might end up homeless on the street.
Veronica. It was very stressful on the Ukrainian side of the border. Guards were under pressure and could be gruff as exhausted people asked, "Why must we wait so long?" I saw very old people, small children who were crying, and pregnant women with nowhere to sit. We stood for 8 hours in line before entering Poland in the middle of the night. The mood was very different on the Polish side. There were so many volunteers offering warm drinks, food, and clothing. We were too exhausted to eat.
Lilia. We crossed the Polish border at 3 a.m. All pets had to be vaccinated. The line was very long. We waited for 3 or 4 hours for Musia, my cat, to get her shots. People asked us, "Where are you going? Krakow? Warsaw? Someplace else?" Alexander, a volunteer, drove us in his private car to my daughter's home in Krakow. Musia was so stressed she did not eat or pee the entire journey.
While all these words shared with you, words that are nearly direct quotes of the lived experience of these 3 women, I want to share with you a message from Lilia because she truly wants us to understand that she, like us, was living a seemingly normal, peaceful life before the war came.
Lilia. I miss my apartment. I miss my students. I miss going to the theater in Kyiv. I miss my friends. I miss my sister who chose to remain in Kyiv. She stops by my apartment to water my plants. This experience has taught me that I am brave and strong. I am learning from this experience. It's interesting to meet a new culture here in Poland. I have gratitude for these lessons. I know now what I need to do. I need to teach my students at Kingdom School about Ukrainian culture and our history and encourage their love for their country. I worry about who will return to Ukraine. Our men are dying. Our cities are being bombed. Will all these Ukrainian women and children return? Putin is trying to destroy the future of our country.
And because I can't help sharing one more message, I want you to know what Tonya would say if she met Vladimir Putin.
It is so hard to imagine what I would say in that unimaginable circumstance. I think I would tell him, we never invited you to our home. We lived peacefully, with happiness and stability before your invasion. We never invited you to our home.
Sadly, war is a repeating act on the stage of humanity whose impact lingers across generations. I invite you to participate in the month-long free educational programming offered by Voices from Ukraine, Vermont at the Fletcher Free and South Burlington libraries. There's an opening reception on Saturday, February 3rd at 11 a.m. of Ukrainian children's art. It's actually art I carried back in my backpack from Masha and Dasha and other wonderful little kids. There'll be food, there'll be a film series happening on 4 consecutive Saturdays between the Burlington and South Burlington libraries. There are flyers at the back of the room. And then when the month comes to an end, I'm going to find a way to make the artworks available for donations to Kingdom School. And then I will conclude the project hoping that our community has learned a bit more about the history and why it's so very important to pay attention to conflict, not just here, but near, far, and everywhere, because we're all impacted. I will end my sermon with words from the 2015 Nobel laureate Svetlana Alexievich, who was born to a Ukrainian mother and a Belarusian father. She currently lives in Germany. When she was traveling to Stockholm, Sweden, to deliver her laureate speech in 2015 for writing that documented the lives of ordinary people like us, ordinary people like Ukrainians, ordinary people living through extraordinary events. 2 Belarusian women stopped her at the airport and said, "Thank you for telling our stories. Now we exist." On behalf of all war refugees across time and across the globe, thank you for listening to Veronica, Tonya, and Lilia.
And we're going to close with hymn number 159, This Is My Song. So if you would rise in body or spirit to sing together. This is my song, O God of all the nations, a song of peace for lands afar and mine. This is my home, my country where my heart is. Here are my hopes, my dreams, my holy shrine. But other hearts in other lands are beating with hopes and dreams as true and high as mine. My country's skies are bluer than the ocean, and sunlight beams on clover leaf and pine. But other lands have sunlight too, and clover, and skies are everywhere as blue as mine. Oh, hear my song, O God of all the nations, a song of peace for their land and for mine.
Okay. Please join us in the words to extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts and share with the world until we are together again. And for our closing, I offer in form of benediction a very short video. It's 61 seconds long. It is the pianist who goes by the pseudonym Alex Pian, which kind of means Alexander Piano. He is the young man who was playing Hans Zimmer's piece Time at the Lviv train station as millions, literally, as millions of Ukrainian refugees were making their way westward to Poland. And as you listen to him play this piece, you will hear the air raid sirens going on. And he was using his music, as has been done in the past, to calm people. So thank you.